I am Rabbi Ariel. For most of my life, I was what many would call a devout man, a man of deep faith, a teacher, a guide, a servant of the Almighty. I was the kind of person others turned to when they were lost, seeking answers in the ancient wisdom of the Torah, the Talmud, and the mysteries of the Kabbalah. From the outside, I was a pillar of my community, a man who walked in the light of the law. But as I sit here now, ready to share my story, I must confess that things were never as simple as they seemed. My life, which once appeared so grounded, so righteous, was a labyrinth of questions, doubts, and shadows I dared not admit even to myself. I remember my days in yeshiva vividly. The hours spent poring over sacred texts, the intensity with which I sought to uncover layer after layer of meaning in the words of our forefathers. Each morning, I would rise before dawn, wrapped tefillin around my arm and forehead, and recite the Shema with fervor. Prayer punctuated every fragment of my day. I was devoted. I believed that through discipline, through rigorous adherence to the law, I could ascend closer to God. My teachers admired me, my peers respected me, and my community placed their trust in me. But even then, in those early days, I sometimes felt a small, gnawing void I could never quite explain. As I grew older, I took on the responsibilities of a rabbi. I became a spiritual leader, a shepherd to my flock. People came to me with their burdens, their sorrows, their dilemmas, and I offered them guidance drawn from the well of our sacred traditions. I officiated at weddings and funerals, celebrated brises, and helped families navigate the complexities of Jewish law. I was the voice of certainty, the embodiment of faith. Yet, deep inside, I began to feel the weight of my role pressing down on me. I was expected to have all the answers, to be unwavering, to embody a purity of spirit that I increasingly doubted I possessed. The questions began as a whisper in the back of my mind. Was I truly fulfilling God's will? Was I worthy of the trust my community placed in me? What if everything I had built my life upon was not enough? At first, I pushed these thoughts away, treating them as mere distractions, temptations to be resisted. But as the years wore on, the whisper grew louder, more insistent. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the sense that something essential was missing from my life. I began to wonder if my devotion to the law had blinded me to something greater, something I could not yet name. My prayers became battles. I would stand before the ark, clutching the Torah, and plead with God to show me the way. Am I enough? I would ask. Am I serving you as you desire? But the heavens remained silent, and my doubts only deepened. I began to see my own reflection in the stories of our ancestors, their struggles, their failures, their moments of despair. I told myself this was part of the human condition, that even Moses doubted, even David faltered. But the knowledge brought me little comfort. I felt like an actor wearing a mask, performing a role I no longer understood. Then came the illness. It began subtly, a faint weakness in my limbs, a persistent ache in my chest. At first, I dismissed it as exhaustion. After all, I was a busy man, constantly on the move, constantly giving of myself. But as the symptoms worsened, I could no longer ignore them. I began to feel a creeping dread, a fear that my body was betraying me. I prayed for healing, for strength, for deliverance, but no relief came. Instead, the pain became my constant companion, a reminder of my own frailty. As my physical condition deteriorated, so too did my spiritual resolve. I began to feel abandoned, as though the God I had served so faithfully had turned his face away from me. I could not understand why I was being made to suffer. Had I not lived a righteous life? Had I not devoted myself fully to his service? The questions that had once been whispers now roared in my mind, drowning out everything else. I felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. One night, as I stood in my study surrounded by the books that had been my lifelong companions, I felt something inside me break. The pain in my chest was unbearable, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. My vision blurred, and the world around me began to fade. My last conscious thought was a desperate plea, "Why, God? Why have you forsaken me?" And then, silence. I felt myself slipping away, the boundaries of my body dissolving. The pain was gone, replaced by a strange, weightless sensation. I opened my eyes, or perhaps it was not my eyes, but some deeper part of my consciousness, and saw my own body lying lifeless on the floor. I was hovering above it, a silent observer. I saw my wife pounding on the door, my students rushing to call for help. But I felt no fear, no sorrow, only a profound stillness. Then came the light. It began as a faint glow in the distance, but it grew quickly, enveloping me in warmth and love unlike anything I had ever known. It was not like the sunlight or the glow of a candle. It was alive, pulsating with energy and compassion. I felt myself drawn toward it, as though every fiber of my being was yearning to merge with this radiant presence. All my doubts, my fears, my pain, they dissolved like mist in the morning sun. I moved through the light, or perhaps the light moved through me. Time and space seemed to lose all meaning. I was no longer Rabbi Ariel, no longer a man bound by the laws of this world. I was simply a soul, a fragment of something infinitely greater. As I drew closer to the source of the light, I felt a presence so vast, so overwhelming, that I could not comprehend it. And yet, it was also intimate, tender, as though it had known me for all eternity. The presence spoke to me, not in words, but in thoughts that resonated deep within my being. Ariel, it said, you have sought me all your life, but you have sought me in the wrong places. You believed that the law would bring you to me, but the law was only ever meant to guide you to something greater, my love. The word struck me like a thunderclap. I had spent my entire life striving to earn God's favor, to prove my worthiness. And now, in this moment of ultimate clarity, I realized that I had misunderstood. God's love was not something to be earned, it was a gift, freely given. As the presence continued to speak, I felt a new understanding dawning within me. I sent my son, it said, to bear the weight of your sins, to show you the depth of my love. Through him, you are forgiven. Through him, you are made whole. You cannot save yourself, Ariel. Salvation is my gift to you. Will you accept it? I was overwhelmed. The idea of God having a son, of this son bearing my sins, it was foreign to everything I had been taught. And yet, in this moment, it felt undeniably true. I saw a vision of a man, beaten and bloodied, carrying a cross up a hill. I saw his agony, his sacrifice, and I felt the weight of my own sins being lifted from me. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, yes. I accept. The light seemed to grow even brighter, enveloping me completely. I felt a joy so profound, so all-encompassing, that it defied description. The presence spoke once more, your journey is not over, Ariel. You must return to the world and share what you have seen. Tell them of my love, my grace, and the gift of my son. The path will not be easy, but I will be with you. And just like that, I felt myself being pulled back through the light, back through the tunnel, back into my body. My eyes flew open, and I gasped for air. Around me, I saw the faces of my loved ones, their expressions a mixture of relief and astonishment. I was alive, but I was not the same man who had collapsed in that room. I had been transformed. In the days and weeks that followed, I struggled to put my experience into words. How could I explain what I had seen, what I had felt? How could I tell my community, my family, that everything I had once believed had been turned upside down? Some listened with open hearts, while others rejected my story outright. But I knew that I could not remain silent. I had been given a glimpse of the truth, and it was now my responsibility to share it. I began to speak, not as a rabbi bound by the law, but as a man who had encountered the boundless love of God. I told them of the light, of the presence, of the message of grace that had been revealed to me. I told them that salvation was not something we could earn, but a gift we could only accept through faith in His Son. Many turned away, unwilling to hear what I had to say. But some listened, and their lives were changed. Now, as I write these words, I am no longer the man I once was. My life is no longer defined by the law, but by the grace and love that have been poured out upon me. I do not know what the future holds, but I walk forward with faith, knowing that I am not alone. God is with me, and His light will guide me. This is my story, my testimony, and I share it with you in the hope that it will bring you closer to the truth. I began my new journey with a hesitant but determined heart. The experience I had undergone was so vivid, so transformative, that I could not deny its truth. And yet, the path ahead was fraught with challenges I could barely imagine. My first steps back into the community were met with confusion and skepticism. People who had once looked to me for guidance now regarded me with wary eyes. My words, once received as gospel, now seemed to fall on deaf ears. At first, I approached my congregation carefully, speaking to them of love and grace in more abstract terms. I tried to weave the message I had received into the familiar language of our traditions, hoping to build a bridge between my old life and the profound truth that had been revealed to me. But the more I spoke, the more I realized that I could not dilute the message. To do so would be to deny the very essence of what I had experienced. The light, the presence, the overwhelming love, it was not just an extension of what I had known. It was something entirely new, something that demanded to be shared in its fullness. One evening, I stood before my congregation during Shabbat services, my heart pounding in my chest. The Torah scroll sat in its place of honor behind me, and the familiar melodies of prayer filled the room. But as I looked out over the faces of my community, I knew I could not hold back any longer. My friends, I began, my voice trembling slightly, I have something to share with you. Something that has changed my life in ways I could never have imagined. I told them my story. Every detail, from the moment I collapsed to the instant I was engulfed by the light. I spoke of the presence I had felt, the words that had been spoken to me, and the vision of the man carrying the cross. I told them of the love that had filled me, the grace that had washed over me, and the undeniable truth that salvation could only be found through Yeshua, through Jesus. The room fell silent. For a moment, I thought I had reached them, that they had felt at least a fraction of the awe and wonder I had experienced. But then, the whispers began. Murmurs of disbelief, of betrayal. One man stood up and shouted, "Blasphemy!" Others followed, their voices rising in anger and confusion. I could see the pain in their eyes, the sense of loss. To them, I was not just challenging their beliefs, I was tearing apart the fabric of their lives. I left the synagogue that night feeling more alone than I ever had before. My closest friends avoided me, my students stopped coming to me for guidance, and even my family struggled to understand the changes in me. But despite the isolation, I felt a deep sense of peace. I knew that the path I was walking was not one of my own choosing. I had been called to it, and I could not turn away. In the weeks that followed, I began to reach out to others, those who might be willing to listen. I visited hospitals, shelters, and prisons, sharing my story with anyone who would hear it. I spoke of the light, of the love that had embraced me, of the grace that was available to all who believed. Slowly, I began to find people who were open to the message. They were not always the people I expected. Often, they were those on the margins of society, those who had been rejected or forgotten. But their hunger for hope, for meaning, was palpable. One day, I met a man named David. He was a former addict who had lost everything, his family, his home, his dignity. When I told him my story, he wept openly, saying, "I thought I was too far gone for God to care about me. But if He could save you, maybe He can save me too." We prayed together, and I saw the light of hope flicker in his eyes for the first time in years. It was moments like these that reminded me why I had been sent back to this world. Over time, a small group of people began to gather around me, men and women who had experienced their own struggles, their own questions, their own moments of doubt. Together, we studied the scriptures, seeking to understand the connection between the ancient prophecies and the life and teachings of Yeshua. We prayed together, sharing our burdens and lifting one another up. It was not a large group, nor was it particularly influential. But it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of belonging. As our group grew, so did the challenges. News of my transformation spread, and I became a target of criticism and ridicule. Some accused me of abandoning my heritage, of turning my back on my people. Others called me a fool, a traitor, a heretic. There were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when I wondered if I had misunderstood my calling. But in those moments, I would return to the memory of the light, the presence, the voice that had spoken to me with such clarity. And I would find the strength to keep going. One night, as I sat alone in my study, I opened the New Testament for the first time. The words felt strange and unfamiliar, but as I read, I began to see the connections, the fulfillment of the promises I had known all my life. The teachings of Yeshua resonated deeply with me, his call to love, to serve, to forgive. And when I reached the account of his crucifixion, I wept as I had never wept before. For the first time, I truly understood the depth of his sacrifice, the enormity of his love. From that moment on, my mission became clear. I was not just a man with a story to tell, I was a messenger of hope, a witness to the transformative power of grace. I began to travel, speaking to anyone who would listen. I visited churches, synagogues, and community centers, sharing my testimony and inviting others to experience the love I had found. Some rejected me outright, but others, like David, found in my words a glimmer of the light that had changed my life. The road has not been easy. I have lost friends, faced persecution, and questioned my own strength more times than I can count. But I have also seen lives transformed, hearts healed, and souls awakened to the truth. And through it all, I have felt the presence of the one who called me, guiding me, sustaining me, and reminding me that I am never alone. My story is not over. In many ways, it is just beginning. Each day brings new challenges, new opportunities, new encounters with the divine. I do not know where this journey will lead, but I walk forward with faith, trusting in the love that has carried me this far. And as I continue to share my testimony, I pray that it will bring light to those who are still searching, still yearning, still waiting for the touch of grace. For I have seen the light, and it has changed everything. I was lost, and now I am found. I was blind, and now I see. And I can say with all my heart, his love is real, his grace is sufficient, and his arms are open to all who will come. This is my story, and it belongs not just to me, but to the one who gave me life, who gave me hope, who gave me a second chance. To him be the glory, now and forever. My journey continued, and with every step forward, I found myself encountering new challenges and unexpected blessings. The more I shared my story, the more I realized that the message wasn't just about me or the light I had seen, it was about the transformative power of love and grace, a power that extended far beyond my own experience. But with that realization came an understanding of the enormity of the task ahead. The world is vast, and the hearts of many are closed by pain, fear, or doubt. How could one man hope to reach them all? I began traveling farther, speaking to groups both large and small. Sometimes I was invited, other times I simply showed up, trusting that the truth of my experience would make room for itself. I spoke in synagogues where my words were met with skepticism, in churches where they were embraced with open arms, and in neutral spaces where curious onlookers gathered to hear what I had to say. Each audience was different, yet all were connected by a common thread, the search for meaning, for hope, for something greater than themselves. One night, I was speaking to a small gathering in a community center in Brooklyn. The room was modest, with folding chairs arranged in neat rows and a single microphone set up at the front. As I shared my story, I noticed a man sitting in the back, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He looked skeptical, almost angry, but he never took his eyes off me. When I finished speaking, he stood up and said, "Rabbi, with all due respect, do you really expect us to believe this? That you, a man of the law, encountered Jesus and suddenly changed everything you believed? How can you betray everything we've been taught?" The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at him. I took a deep breath and responded, "My friend, I understand your doubt. I was once where you are, questioning, skeptical, unwilling to believe that there could be more than what I was taught. But what I experienced was not something I could invent or imagine. It was real, and it changed me in ways I cannot fully explain. I am not asking you to take my word for it. I am asking you to seek the truth for yourself. Ask God to reveal himself to you. He is not far away, he is closer than you think. The man stared at me for a long moment before sitting back down, his expression unreadable. I didn't know if my words had reached him, but I prayed silently that a seed had been planted. As the crowd dispersed, he lingered at the back of the room, watching me as I spoke with others. Finally, as I was gathering my things to leave, he approached me. "I don't know if I believe you," he said, his voice softer now, "but something about what you said, it stirred something in me. I'll think about it." Encounters like that one became a regular part of my life. For every person who rejected my message outright, there was another who seemed to hear something that resonated deep within them. I came to understand that my role was not to convince or convert, it was simply to bear witness to the truth I had experienced. The rest was in God's hands. As the years went on, I began to see the ripple effects of my testimony. People who had once been closed off to the idea of grace began to open their hearts. Families were healed, addictions were broken, and lives were transformed. It wasn't because of me, I was merely a vessel. The power was in the message, in the love that had been shown to me and that I now sought to share with others. But the road was not without its hardships. There were times when I felt the weight of the opposition pressing down on me, times when I wondered if I was truly making a difference. I faced criticism not only from those who rejected my message, but also from those who questioned my qualifications to speak on such matters. "You're not a Christian," some would say. "What gives you the right to talk about Jesus?" Others accused me of abandoning my Jewish heritage, of betraying my people. It was a lonely place to be, caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. In those moments of doubt, I would return to the memory of the light, the presence, the voice that had spoken to me with such clarity. I would remind myself of the joy and peace I had felt in that moment, the overwhelming love that had filled me. And I would press on, trusting that the one who had called me would also sustain me. One particularly difficult day, I received a letter from a woman named Miriam. She wrote that she had heard me speak at an event months earlier and had been deeply moved by my story. At the time, she had been battling depression and had felt completely abandoned by God. "Your words gave me hope," she wrote. "For the first time in years, I felt like maybe God hadn't forgotten me after all." I started praying again, asking Him to show me the truth. And one night, I felt it, a presence, a peace I can't explain. I knew in that moment that He was with me, that He loved me. "Thank you for sharing your story. It changed my life." I read her letter over and over, tears streaming down my face. It was a reminder that even in the face of opposition, even when the path seemed impossibly hard, the message was worth sharing. If even one life could be touched, one soul could be brought closer to the light, then every struggle, every sacrifice, was worth it. The years passed, and my mission continued. I traveled to places I never thought I would go, met people I never thought I would meet. Each encounter was a reminder of the vastness of God's love, a love that transcends boundaries, cultures, and traditions. I saw lives transformed not through my words, but through the power of the message I carried. And through it all, I felt the presence of the one who had called me, guiding me, strengthening me, reminding me that I was never alone. Now, as I reflect on my journey, I am filled with gratitude. Gratitude for the experience that opened my eyes to the truth, for the grace that saved me, and for the opportunity to share that grace with others. I do not know what the future holds, but I walk forward with faith, trusting in the love that has carried me this far. My story is not over, it is still being written, one step, one encounter, one life at a time. And so, I continue. I continue to speak, to share, to love, and to hope. I continue to bear witness to the light that changed everything, the love that knows no bounds, the grace that is freely given to all who will receive it. This is my calling, my purpose, my joy. And I will carry it with me until the day I am called home, back into the light, back into the presence of the one who is love itself. As my journey unfolded, I began to notice something remarkable. The message I carried, the truth I had witnessed, was not bound by the walls of a synagogue or the doctrines of a church. It reached beyond the boundaries of religion, beyond culture, beyond all the lines humanity has drawn to separate itself. The love I had experienced in the light, the grace that had been extended to me, was for everyone. And that realization filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. I began to seek out those who were on the fringes, those who felt excluded or unworthy. I visited homeless shelters, where men and women who had lost everything listened intently as I spoke of a love that could never be lost. I went to prisons, where hardened criminals wept openly as they heard of a grace that could redeem even the darkest of pasts. I sat with people of other faiths, people who had given up on faith altogether, and I shared my story, not to convert them, but simply to show them that they were not forgotten. One of the most profound encounters I had was with a man named Khalil. He was a Muslim cleric, a man deeply devoted to his faith. We met by chance at a community event, and he approached me afterward with a curious expression. "You speak of God's love in a way that is both familiar and strange to me," he said. "In Islam, we know Allah as merciful and compassionate, but the way you describe His love, it is different. Tell me more." We sat together for hours, sharing our stories, our beliefs, our doubts. Khalil listened with an open heart as I recounted my near-death experience, the light, the presence, the voice that had spoken to me. He did not interrupt or debate, he simply listened. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long time before saying, "I do not fully understand what you experienced, but I cannot deny the sincerity of your words. Perhaps God reveals Himself to us in ways we cannot comprehend, each according to His will." That conversation stayed with me. It reminded me that the God I had encountered was not confined to any one tradition or theology. He was far greater, far more inclusive than I had ever imagined. And while my path was now firmly rooted in the grace I had found through Yeshua, I began to see that my mission was not to draw lines, but to build bridges. To show people, no matter where they came from or what they believed, that they were loved beyond measure. As the years went on, I began to see the fruits of this approach. People who had once been divided by religion, race, or ideology began to come together, united by a shared longing for something greater. I saw Christians and Jews praying side by side, Muslims and atheists engaging in heartfelt conversations about faith and meaning. It was not always easy, and there were many who resisted, who clung tightly to their divisions. But for those who opened their hearts, something beautiful began to emerge, a glimpse, perhaps, of the kingdom of God. But my journey was not without its trials. As my message spread, so too did the opposition. There were religious leaders who denounced me, accusing me of heresy or apostasy. There were extremists who sent threats, warning me to stop speaking about grace and love. There were moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when I questioned whether I could continue. One particularly dark night, as I sat alone in a small hotel room after a speaking engagement, I found myself overwhelmed by doubt. The criticism, the rejection, the loneliness, it had all begun to take its toll. Am I truly making a difference? I whispered into the silence. Am I doing what you called me to do, or am I just a fool chasing after the wind? In that moment, I felt a familiar warmth wash over me, a presence I had not felt so strongly since my near-death experience. It was as though the light itself had entered the room, not in a physical sense, but in a way that filled my heart and soul. And in that presence, I felt a reassurance, a quiet but unmistakable voice that said, "You are not alone, Ariel. I am with you. Keep going." Those words were enough to carry me through the darkness. They reminded me that my mission was not about immediate results or widespread acceptance. It was about faithfulness. It was about planting seeds, trusting that God would bring the growth in His time and in His way. And so I pressed on, renewed in my resolve. Over time, my story began to reach people I never expected. A young woman named Rachel, who had grown up in an abusive home and had turned to drugs to numb her pain, wrote to me after hearing me speak. Her letter was raw and honest, filled with questions and doubts. "If God is real," she wrote, "why did He let me suffer so much? Why didn't He save me when I begged Him to?" I met with Rachel in person, and we talked for hours. I didn't have all the answers to her questions, how could I? But I shared with her what I knew, that God's love was real, that His grace was sufficient, and that even in the darkest moments, He was there. Slowly, Rachel began to open her heart. She started attending meetings with others who had experienced similar pain, and over time, she found healing. Today, she works with at-risk youth, sharing her story and offering them the hope she found. Stories like Rachel's reminded me why I continued, even when the road was hard. Each life touched, each heart opened, was a testament to the power of the love I had encountered in the light. And it wasn't just others who were being transformed, I was changing too. The man who had once been so focused on the letter of the law, so consumed by the need to earn God's favor, was now learning to rest in His grace. I was learning to trust, to surrender, to live each day as a gift. One day, as I was walking through a park in Jerusalem, I came across a group of children playing. Their laughter filled the air, and I couldn't help but smile. One of the children, a little boy with curly hair and bright eyes, ran up to me and said, "Who are you, mister?" "I'm Ariel," I replied. "And who are you?" The boy grinned. "I'm David. Do you want to play with us?" I laughed and shook my head. "I think I'm a little too old for that. But thank you for asking." David tilted his head, studying me. "You look happy," he said. "Why are you happy?" I knelt down so I could look him in the eye. "I'm happy because I know that I'm loved," I said. "And you're loved too, David. Never forget that." He smiled, then ran back to join his friends. As I watched him go, I felt a deep sense of peace. It was a simple moment, but it reminded me of the simplicity of the message I carried. We are loved. All of us. And that love has the power to change everything. As I continue on this journey, I hold on to that truth. The road ahead is still uncertain, and I know there will be more challenges, more doubts, more moments of struggle. But I also know that the light that guided me once will guide me still. And so I walk forward, one step at a time, trusting in the love that has brought me this far. This is not the end of my story. It is simply another chapter in a journey that began the moment I let go of my fear and embraced the grace that was offered to me. And as long as I have breath, I will continue to share that grace with others, to bear witness to the light, and to live in the joy and freedom of knowing that I am loved. For that, above all else, is the greatest gift of all. As the years continued to pass, I began to notice the way in which my journey seemed to ripple outward, touching lives in the most unexpected ways. Often, it wasn't the large gatherings or the formal speeches that made the greatest impact. It was the quiet conversations, the moments of connection that happened in passing, sometimes with complete strangers. One such moment occurred while I was traveling through a small town in Pennsylvania. I had been invited to speak at a church, but I arrived early and decided to take a walk through the town square. It was a chilly autumn afternoon, the air crisp and filled with the scent of fallen leaves. As I passed a small coffee shop, I noticed a woman sitting alone by the window, her hands wrapped around a mug as she stared out at the street. There was a heaviness about her, a sadness that seemed to hang in the air around her like a cloud. Something compelled me to step inside. I ordered a cup of tea and, after a moment of hesitation, approached her table. "Excuse me," I said gently. "I couldn't help but notice that you seem troubled. Would it be all right if I joined you?" She looked up at me, startled, but then nodded. "I suppose," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Though I don't know what good it'll do." I sat down and introduced myself. Her name was Claire, and as we began to talk, she shared that she had recently lost her husband in a car accident. They had been married for 25 years, and his sudden death had left her reeling. "I don't know how to go on," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "Every day feels like a struggle just to get out of bed. I keep asking God why He would take him from me, but I don't hear any answers." My heart ached for her, and I felt the weight of her pain as though it were my own. I told her about my own moments of questioning, of feeling abandoned and lost. I shared how, in my darkest hour, I had encountered a love so profound that it had transformed my understanding of suffering and loss. "I can't tell you why these things happen, Claire," I said. "I don't have all the answers. But what I do know is that you are not alone. God sees you, He loves you, and He is with you, even in this pain. We talked for over an hour, and by the time I left, there was a small but noticeable lightness in her expression. "Thank you," she said as I stood to leave. "I don't know if I believe everything you've said, but I feel a little less alone. And maybe that's enough for now." It was moments like these that reminded me of the quiet power of presence, of simply being there for someone in their time of need. I didn't always have the answers, more often than not, I didn't. But I had learned that sometimes, the most important thing we can do is to show up, to listen, and to remind people that they are seen and loved. Over time, I began to see these moments as part of a larger tapestry, one that I could only glimpse in pieces. Each life I touched, each story I heard, was like a thread, weaving together into something beautiful and mysterious. And though I couldn't always see the full picture, I trusted that the one who had called me was at work, using even my smallest efforts to bring light into the world. But there were also moments of great challenge, times when my faith was tested in ways I had never anticipated. One such test came in the form of a man named Isaac. He was an old friend from my days as a rabbi, a man I had studied with and admired deeply. When he heard about my transformation, he sought me out, not to reconnect, but to confront me. We met in a cafe in Jerusalem, a place we had frequented together many years ago. As we sat across from each other, the tension was palpable. Isaac wasted no time. "Ariel," he said, his voice sharp, "what are you doing? Do you have any idea how much damage you're causing? You've abandoned the law, our traditions, everything we were taught. How can you justify this?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself before responding. "Isaac," I said, "I haven't abandoned anything. I still love the Torah, the law, the wisdom of our ancestors. But I've come to understand that they were never meant to be the end, they were always pointing to something greater. And I've found that greater thing. I've found grace." He shook his head, his expression a mix of anger and sadness. "Grace," he said bitterly. "You think grace can replace the covenant God made with our people? You think it's that simple?" "It's not simple," I said. "It's the most profound thing I've ever experienced. Isaac, I was lost. I was drowning in my own unworthiness, my own inability to live up to the law. And then, in my darkest moment, I encountered a love so overwhelming, so unconditional, that it changed everything. I'm not asking you to understand, I'm not even asking you to agree. But I can't deny what I've experienced." We argued for hours, our conversation oscillating between theological debate and emotional appeals. By the end, neither of us had convinced the other, but as we parted ways, I saw a flicker of something in Isaac's eyes. Curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe just the faintest crack in his armor. I prayed for him that night, asking God to soften his heart, to reveal the truth to him in his own time and way. Encounters like this were difficult, but they also reminded me of the importance of perseverance. Not everyone would accept the message I carried, and that was okay. My role was not to force anyone to believe, but simply to share what I had seen, to be a witness to the light that had transformed my life. As I write these words now, I am struck by how far this journey has taken me, both physically and spiritually. I have traveled to places I never imagined, met people from every walk of life, and witnessed the incredible power of grace to heal, to restore, to transform. And through it all, I have been reminded, time and again, of the simple but profound truth that lies at the heart of it all: we are loved. Deeply, unconditionally, and eternally. My journey is not yet over. There are still so many people to reach, so many lives to touch, so many stories to hear. But I no longer feel the weight of the task as I once did. I have learned to trust, to rest in the knowledge that I am not walking this path alone. The light that guided me once continues to guide me still, and I know that it will lead me home when the time comes. Until then, I will keep going. I will keep sharing, keep loving, keep bearing witness to the grace that changed everything. For as long as I have breath, I will tell anyone who will listen that they are not alone, that they are seen, that they are loved. This is my calling, my purpose, my joy. And it is more than enough. The years continued to unfold like chapters in a book, each one bringing new experiences, new faces, and new lessons. As I traveled from city to city, country to country, I began to see how interconnected we all are, how the threads of our lives weave into a larger story that none of us can fully comprehend. I often thought back to that moment in the light, when time and space had dissolved, and I had felt utterly known and utterly loved. That memory became my anchor, my compass, guiding me through the storms of doubt, rejection, and fear. One of the most profound lessons I learned during this time was the importance of humility. Early on in my journey, I had thought of myself as a messenger, someone carrying a great truth to those who needed to hear it. But the more people I met, the more I realized that I was not just a messenger, I was also a student. Every person I encountered had something to teach me, some unique perspective or experience that deepened my understanding of the love and grace I had come to know. I remember a particular conversation with an elderly woman named Rosa. She was a Holocaust survivor, a woman who had endured unimaginable suffering and loss. When I met her, she was living in a small apartment in New York City, her walls lined with photographs of family members who were no longer with her. Despite everything she had been through, there was a quiet strength about her, a resilience that was both humbling and inspiring. As we talked, Rosa shared her story with me, her childhood in Poland, the horrors of the concentration camps, the years of rebuilding her life after the war. I used to ask why, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Why did God let this happen? Why did He take everything from me? But over time, I realized that the answers to those questions would not bring me peace. What brought me peace was knowing that He was with me, even in the darkest moments. Her words struck a chord deep within me. Here was a woman who had faced the very worst that humanity could offer, and yet she had found a way to hold on to her faith, to trust in a love that transcended her pain. Rosa, I said, my voice thick with emotion, your story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of grace. Thank you for sharing it with me. She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. And thank you, Ariel, for reminding me that love is still the greatest force in the world. It's easy to forget that sometimes, but it's true. Love is what carries us through. That conversation stayed with me, a reminder that grace is not just something we receive, it's something we carry, something we share with others. Rosa's story became one of many that I carried with me, each one a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the boundless depths of God's love. But even as I continued to grow in my understanding, there were moments when the weight of my journey felt almost unbearable. There were nights when I lay awake, haunted by the faces of those who had rejected my message, those who had turned away in anger or disbelief. I thought of Isaac, my old friend, and wondered if he had found any peace. I thought of the members of my former congregation, many of whom had cut ties with me entirely. I thought of my own family, who still struggled to understand the path I had chosen. One night, as I sat alone in a small hotel room, I found myself overcome with doubt. Am I truly doing your will? I prayed, my voice barely audible. Am I making any difference at all? Or am I just chasing after my own dreams, my own desires? In the silence that followed, I felt a familiar warmth wash over me, a quiet but unmistakable presence that filled the room. It was not as overwhelming as the light I had encountered during my near-death experience, but it was just as real. And in that presence, I felt a reassurance, a gentle reminder that I was not alone, that my efforts were not in vain. The next morning, I received an email from a young man named Jacob. He had attended one of my talks several months earlier and had been deeply moved by my story. I've been struggling with addiction for years, he wrote. I've hurt my family, my friends, and myself in ways I can't even begin to describe. But when I heard you speak about grace, something inside me shifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. I started going to meetings, reconnecting with my family, and trying to rebuild my life. I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story. It gave me the courage to take the first step. I read Jacob's email over and over, tears streaming down my face. It was a reminder that even in the moments when I felt small and insignificant, God was at work, using my story to touch the lives of others. It was not about me. It had never been about me. It was about the message, the light, the love that had been entrusted to me. And as long as there were people like Jacob who needed to hear it, I would keep going. As my journey continued, I began to see the impact of my message in ways I never could have imagined. Small groups began to form in the towns and cities I visited, communities of people who were drawn together by a shared desire to explore the depths of grace and love. These groups were not bound by any one tradition or doctrine. They were simply people seeking truth, seeking connection, seeking God. One of the most beautiful things about these communities was the way they embraced diversity. I saw people of different faiths, backgrounds, and experiences coming together, united by a common longing for something greater. I saw Jews and Christians studying scripture side by side, Muslims and atheists engaging in heartfelt conversations about faith and meaning. It was a glimpse of the kingdom of God, a reminder that love knows no boundaries. And yet, there were still challenges. There were still moments of rejection, moments when I felt the sting of criticism and doubt. But through it all, I held on to the memory of the light, the presence, the voice that had called me. I held on to the stories of people like Rosa and Jacob, people whose lives had been touched by the message I carried. And I held on to the quiet assurance that I was not walking this path alone. Now, as I reflect on all that has happened, I am filled with a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the people I have met, for the lessons I have learned. Gratitude for the grace that saved me, the love that sustains me, and the hope that carries me forward. My story is still being written, and I know there are many chapters yet to come. But whatever the future holds, I will continue to walk this path with faith, with love, and with the quiet assurance that I am exactly where I am meant to be. For I have seen the light, and it has changed everything. And as long as I have breath, I will continue to share that light with the world. As the seasons turned and the years passed, my journey became not just a path of faith, but also one of reconciliation. I began to understand that the message of love and grace I carried was not only for those who were lost or searching, it was also for those who had misunderstood me, who had rejected me, and, in some cases, who had been hurt by the changes in my life. And so, I found myself drawn back to the places and people I had left behind, compelled by a deep desire to mend what had been broken. One of the most difficult reconciliations I faced was with my family. My wife, Miriam, had stood by me through the initial shock of my transformation, but I knew it had not been easy for her. She was a deeply traditional woman, committed to the faith we had both once shared so fully. While she respected my journey, she struggled to understand it. Our conversations were often careful, measured, as though we were tiptoeing around a fragile truth that neither of us dared to shatter. One evening, as we sat together at the kitchen table, I decided it was time to address the unspoken tension between us. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. "Miriam," I began, my voice hesitant, "I know that my journey has been hard for you. I know that you felt like I've changed in ways you didn't expect. And I want you to know that I see your pain, and I carry it with me every day." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and sadness. "Ariel," she said softly, "it's not just that you've changed. It's that I feel like I've lost the man I married. The man who was so grounded in our traditions, who found joy in the law, who led our family with such confidence. I don't know how to follow you on this path you've chosen." Her words cut deep, but they also revealed a truth I had been afraid to face. In my zeal to share the love and grace I had experienced, I had sometimes neglected the love that was right in front of me, her love, and the bond we had built over so many years. "Miriam," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand, "I am still that man. I still love the Torah, the traditions, the wisdom of our ancestors. But I've come to understand them in a new way, a way that has brought me closer to God than I ever thought possible. I don't want to lose you on this journey. I want you to walk with me, even if it means we take small steps together." She was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on our joined hands. Finally, she nodded. "I don't understand everything you've experienced," she said. "But I see the way it has changed you. I see the peace it has brought you. And I want to understand, even if it takes time." From that night on, our relationship began to heal. It wasn't a sudden transformation, it was a slow, steady process, marked by honest conversations, shared prayers, and a renewed commitment to walking this path together. Miriam didn't adopt all of my beliefs, nor did I expect her to. But she opened her heart to the possibility of grace, and in doing so, she opened a door for us to move forward as partners once again. Reconciliation with my family was just the beginning. I also felt a deep burden to reach out to my former congregation, the people who had once looked to me as their rabbi and spiritual guide. Many of them had cut ties with me after I began sharing my experience, viewing my transformation as a betrayal of the faith we had all held dear. But I couldn't ignore the love I still felt for them, or the hope that, one day, they might come to see the light I had encountered. I began writing letters to those I had been closest to, letters filled with honesty, humility, and a heartfelt desire to reconnect. I didn't try to convince them of my new beliefs or defend my choices. Instead, I focused on the bond we had shared, the memories we had made, and the love that still remained. Some of the letters went unanswered, but others brought responses that surprised me. One of the first people to reply was Leah, a woman who had been a devoted member of the congregation and a close friend to Miriam and me. Her letter was cautious but kind. "Ariel," she wrote, "I don't understand what has happened to you, and I admit that I've felt hurt and confused by the changes I've seen. But I also know the man you are, the man you've always been. And if you feel that this path is where God has called you, then who am I to judge? I would like to talk, if you're willing." We arranged to meet at a small cafe near the synagogue where I had once served. The conversation was tentative at first, but as we talked, the years of friendship between us began to bridge the gap. Leah asked questions, some skeptical, some curious, and I answered them as honestly as I could. By the end of our meeting, she said something that stayed with me. "I may not agree with you, Ariel, but I see that your heart is sincere. And that counts for something." Encouraged by these small steps, I continued reaching out to others, slowly rebuilding relationships that had been strained or broken. Each conversation was a reminder that reconciliation is not about erasing differences or forcing agreement. It's about meeting people where they are, extending grace, and allowing love to do its quiet, transformative work. As my journey of reconciliation unfolded, I began to see it as an extension of the larger mission I had been given. The light I had encountered was not just for me, it was for everyone. And part of my calling was to reflect that light in the way I lived, the way I loved, and the way I sought to heal the wounds of the past. Now, as I sit here reflecting on all that has happened, I am filled with a profound sense of peace. The road ahead is still uncertain, and I know there will be challenges yet to come. But I also know that I am not walking this path alone. The presence that guided me once continues to guide me still, and the love that transformed me continues to flow through me, touching lives in ways I may never fully understand. My story is far from over. There are still people to reach, relationships to mend, and lessons to learn. But I walk forward with hope, with faith, and with the quiet assurance that every step I take is part of a larger journey, a journey that began in the light and will one day lead me back to it. Until that day comes, I will keep sharing, keep loving, and keep seeking to be a vessel of grace in a world that so desperately needs it. This is my calling, my purpose, my joy. And it is more than enough. As time went on, the scope of my journey began to evolve. What had started as a personal mission to share the love and grace I had experienced became something larger, something I could never have anticipated. People from all walks of life began reaching out to me, not just to hear my story, but to share their own. They spoke of their struggles, their doubts, their moments of despair and hope. They asked questions that challenged me, questions that forced me to search my heart and my faith for answers. And in listening to them, I found myself growing in ways I had never expected. One of the most humbling aspects of this new chapter in my journey was the realization that I didn't need to have all the answers. There were times when I felt ill-equipped, when someone's pain or question seemed too great for me to address. But in those moments, I learned to lean on the one who had called me, to trust that his strength would be made perfect in my weakness. And time and again, I saw how God used even my inadequacies to bring comfort, healing, and hope to others. One such moment occurred during a visit to a small town in the Midwest. I had been invited to speak at a community center, and after the event, a young woman named Sarah approached me. She looked nervous, as though she were unsure whether to speak or simply walk away. I smiled and gestured for her to join me. "Please," I said, "tell me what's on your heart." Sarah hesitated, her hands twisting together. Finally, she said, "I don't know if I belong here. I wasn't raised in any faith, and I've done things I'm not proud of. I heard about your story from a friend, and something about it made me want to come. But now that I'm here, I feel like I'm not good enough. Like this love you talk about isn't for someone like me." Her words broke my heart, not because they were unique, but because they were so common. How many people, I wondered, walk through life feeling unworthy of love, convinced that their mistakes had placed them beyond the reach of grace? I looked into Sarah's eyes, and I saw not just her fear, but also her longing, her desperate hope that she might be wrong. "Sarah," I said gently, "the love I've experienced, the grace I've come to know, is not something any of us can earn. It's a gift, freely given, to all who are willing to receive it. It doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. You are loved, just as you are. And that love has the power to transform everything." Tears filled her eyes, and she nodded slowly. "I want to believe that," she whispered. "I don't know if I can, but I want to." We talked for a long time that evening, and as Sarah opened up about her past, I saw the first glimmers of hope take root in her heart. Before we parted, I prayed with her, asking God to reveal His love to her in a way that she could feel and understand. And as I watched her walk away, I felt a quiet assurance that her journey was just beginning. Stories like Sarah's became a constant reminder of why I continued to share my testimony, even when the road was difficult. It wasn't about me or my experiences, it was about the countless lives that could be touched, the countless hearts that could be opened by the message of grace and love. As the years went by, I also began to see the seeds I had planted start to bear fruit. Small groups I had spoken to grew into thriving communities, each one unique but united by a shared desire to explore faith, love, and grace. Some of these communities were rooted in churches or synagogues, while others met in coffee shops, homes, or even online. They were not bound by tradition or doctrine, but by a common longing to know the God who had revealed Himself to me in the light. One of the most remarkable communities I encountered was in a small village in Eastern Europe. I had visited the village years earlier, sharing my story with a group of about 20 people. At the time, I thought little of it. It was one of many stops on a long journey, and I had no way of knowing what impact, if any, my words had made. But when I returned years later, I was astonished to find that the group had grown into a vibrant community of faith, with dozens of members meeting regularly to pray, study, and support one another. The leader of the group, a young man named Tomas, greeted me with tears in his eyes. "Ariel," he said, "you have no idea what your visit meant to us. When you spoke of the light, of the love you encountered, it awakened something in us. It gave us hope, and we've been sharing that hope with others ever since." As I spent time with Tomas and the members of his community, I was struck by the depth of their faith and the joy that radiated from them. They had faced hardships, poverty, illness, and even persecution, but they had not lost hope. Instead, they had drawn closer together, finding strength in their shared belief that they were loved and seen by God. Moments like these filled me with gratitude and humility. They reminded me that the message I carried was not mine, it was a gift, entrusted to me to share with others. And as I saw how that gift had taken root in the lives of people like Tomas and Sarah, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a renewed commitment to the path I was walking. But even as my journey brought moments of joy and connection, it also brought moments of profound challenge. There were still those who rejected my message, who questioned my motives or accused me of abandoning my heritage. There were still nights when doubt crept in, whispering that I was not enough, that my efforts were futile. And there were still times when the weight of it all felt almost too much to bear. In those moments, I returned to the memory of the light, the presence, the voice that had called me. I reminded myself of the love that had embraced me when I was at my lowest, the grace that had lifted me when I could not lift myself. And I prayed for strength, for guidance, and for the courage to keep going. Now, as I look back on all that has happened, I am filled with a sense of wonder. The path I have walked has been far from easy, but it has been rich with meaning, beauty, and grace. I have seen lives transformed, hearts healed, and communities built on the foundation of love. And I have learned that even the smallest act of kindness, the smallest word of hope, can ripple outward in ways we cannot imagine. My story is not finished. There are still new chapters to be written, new lives to touch, new lessons to learn. But I walk forward with faith, trusting in the one who has guided me this far. For I know that the light that called me once will continue to lead me, and the love that saved me will never let me go. And so I will continue. I will continue to share, to love, to build bridges and plant seeds. I will continue to bear witness to the grace that changed everything. And I will continue to walk this path, one step at a time, until the day I am called home. For this is my calling. This is my purpose. This is my joy. And it is more than enough. As I near the end of this journey, I find myself reflecting on the many paths I have walked, the countless faces I have met, and the lessons etched into the corners of my heart. It is strange to think how far I have come from that fateful moment when I first encountered the light, how one experience, one encounter with the divine, could change the course of my life so profoundly. The years have withered me, as they do all of us. My hair has turned silver, my steps have slowed, and my hands, once steady and strong, now tremble with age. Yet, my heart feels fuller than ever before, brimming with gratitude for the life I have lived and the love I have shared. I know my time on this earth is drawing to a close, but there is no fear in me, only a quiet peace. For I have seen the light that awaits, and I know that when this chapter ends, a new one will begin. In these final days, I find myself drawn to the small, simple moments of life that so often go unnoticed, the laughter of children playing in the distance, the warmth of the sun on my face, the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. These moments remind me of the beauty of creation, the intricate tapestry of life that speaks so clearly of the one who made it all. They remind me, too, of the love that underpins everything, the love that called me, sustained me, and carried me through every trial and triumph. There is one last journey I feel compelled to make, a journey back to the place where it all began. I have not returned to Damascus since the day I left, but something stirs within me now, urging me to go back. It is not a longing for the past, nor a desire to revisit old memories. It is something deeper, a sense that my story must come full circle. And so, with the help of my family and friends, I make the journey. The city has changed in many ways, yet in others, it is exactly as I remember it. The streets are alive with the sounds of daily life, the air thick with the smell of spices and the hum of conversation. I walk through the city slowly, taking in every detail, until I come to the road where it all began. Standing there, I close my eyes and let the memories wash over me. I remember the man I was, the man so consumed by zeal, so convinced of his own righteousness, so blind to the grace that was waiting for him. I remember the flash of light, the voice that stopped me in my tracks, the presence that enveloped me in love. And I remember the way it changed me, breaking me open and reshaping me into someone new. As I open my eyes, I feel a sense of completion, as though a circle has been drawn around my life. I do not know why I was called to this place again, but I trust that it is part of the larger story, the one I cannot yet fully see. I offer a silent prayer of thanks, for the light, for the love, for the journey that has brought me here. And then I turn and begin to walk back, each step a reminder that my story is not my own, but part of something far greater. Back home, surrounded by those I love, I feel the weight of the years settle over me like a gentle blanket. I know my time is near, and I am ready. There is no fear, only an eager anticipation to return to the light, to the presence that first called me so many years ago. I gather my family around me and share my final words, not of doctrine or debate, but of love. I tell them that they are cherished, that they are seen, that they are never alone. I tell them to carry the light forward, to be vessels of grace in a world that so desperately needs it. And then, one quiet evening, I close my eyes for the last time. As the world fades away, I feel the familiar warmth surround me, the presence I have longed for all these years. The light is there, brighter and more beautiful than I could have imagined, and as I step into it, I am filled with a joy so profound that it takes my breath away. The journey is over, and yet it has only just begun. For the love that called me once now calls me home. And in that love, I am finally whole.